Ontario, and welcome to the Rewilding the Vegetable Garden, native plants as companions and pollinator powerhouse. The fact that
I know this person.
And not watching the leaf game tonight is indeed a very high honor. All of you will be at different points in your journey. Some of you may be new to veggie gardening or native plants or both. Some of you will be experts. Just even trying a few new native species this season based on this research will make your garden thrive. No need to take notes. The plant list shown will be available to NANPS members. Just contact me at the email given at the end of the webinar. So here's what to expect. So first, the 3 C's, a short introduction to beneficial insects. We'll talk about a few problems and then go to the vegetable families, focusing on 3 specific ones, and then to my top 5 practical tips at the end.
Can I just interject one moment? I want to ask people to please mute yourselves because there's some background noise. Thank you.
Janice needs to be unmuted.
Janice is still muted.
There we go. Bingo.
So can I just ask, did everyone hear me from the beginning? Was this just recent that the unmuting took place? Okay, excellent, thank you. So I'll start again with my confession. So I've always been more of a vegetable gardener from growing up on our farm in southwestern Ontario. No one even knew the term native plant. Wildflowers were in the woods. When you got to the fields where the corn or the soy was, they became weeds. I paid my way through university working with vegetables, doing corn detasseling and growing acres of cucumbers for Bix. That latter experience turned me into an organic agricultural activist, and you can read between the lines on that. The fact that I'm a director of the North American Native Plant Society shows how dramatically my thinking has changed over the years. I also must confess that I actually like cosmos and nasturtiums. I've even planted them in my day, but that made me curious. Is that all there really is? What about native plants instead? So my insatiable curiosity had me begin researching and learning, and that led me to a compilation from various databases of matching appropriate native plants with those pollinators and beneficial insects, the good guys that are your gardening superheroes that are fighting the bad guys. If you're new to veggie gardening and you don't know what bad guy pests I'm talking about, don't worry, you'll find out sooner rather than later. The good guys have a few names: beneficial insects, natural enemies, or in agricultural language, biocontrol agents in IPM, which stands for Integrated Pest Management. Beneficials constitute a major plank in the concept of companion planting, which you may be already familiar with. A classic example is that of planting asparagus and tomatoes together. The tomato will protect it from asparagus beetles, and asparagus root secretions kill the nematode that attacks the tomato roots. These beneficial insects are what I call the 3 Ps: pollinators, predatory insects, and parasitoids. So these insects need food, often frequent feeding, a little bit like adolescents raiding the fridge all day long. They also need a place to live, and this is where native plants fit the bill perfectly. There is a warning though from Cornell University about nativars, which are hybridized native cultivars that appear to have less pollen and less nectar than true natives. So first, a few problems. The first one is the need for more collaboration and knowledge sharing between the 2 silos. One focused on production, yield, and weed control, and the other on biodiversity, ecosystems, and native plant communities. Xerces Society, and Pollinator Partnership, now in Canada, do fantastic work. Another great example is the 2019 landmark book on flower flies, our second most important pollinator next to bees, by Jeffrey Scarrington, a specialist in flies at the Canadian National Collection of Insects in Ottawa, and Michelle Locke of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Being at the intersection of these silos, agriculture and conservation biology, can help see where the gaps are that need to be filled. The role that citizen science can play at this intersection of silos cannot be overstated. So while the emphasis on these non-native annuals like cosmos and nasturtiums that you are seeing in this picture, you see the same companion plant lists everywhere. Even a 2009 study from Oregon State University's Department of Horticulture only offered non-natives, including alyssum and Korean licorice mint, as what to plant to attract flower flies and parasitoid wasps. This is not just the situation in North America. It's seen in many countries, as seen by the findings from the UK and Australia. Even when research shows clearly that native plants attract a significantly higher diversity of flower visiting insects, various agricultural bodies like Ontario's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, called OMAFRA, still are not convinced. Their 2010 IPM document does not state that native plants are definitely a good choice. They just may be a good choice. We need more scientific research-based data on the connection between native plant floral resources and beneficial insects. This 2007 study from the University of Michigan entitled Attracting Beneficial Insects with Native Flowering Plants is the only example I could find of what should be widely available using empirical data monitoring methodology. It's one of the databases I consulted in the compilation of the plant lists in this webinar. The fourth problem and the final problem is the honeybee myth, and the mass marketing campaign saying that honeybees are the best pollinator bar none, when in fact, native bees and flower flies are the most efficient top two pollinators. As the Xerces Society reminds us, 1 in 3 bites of every meal that we eat is because of wild bee activity. This is why the work of Dr. Sheila Kola and the Native Pollinator Research Lab she directs at York University is so important. Multiple complementary pollinators should be the ideal. I'm going to draw your attention to the last point on this slide, which is the example of a small orchard and fruiting trees. This is going to be my only example involving fruits and fruiting trees, even though I've done research on that area as well, simply for the matter of time and just the emphasis is definitely on vegetables for this webinar. But in this example, I think it's very telling that a study did look at the connection between mining bees, Adrena, native bees, and also a particular polyester bee. And they found that they're actually the more dominant pollinator for smaller orchards of apples, cherries, and blueberries. So that means that honeybees were basically superseded by these native bees. But then as soon as the orchard became very large, then all of a sudden, honeybees became once again the more dominant pollinator. And why this is so does not seem to be fully understood. And if anyone could provide an answer for that question for me, I would be grateful. But as Cornell College of Agriculture found out, that actually these native bees are much more effective at depositing pollen in the flowers than honeybees are. So now we're going to turn to vegetable families. Now, vegetables, like native plants and us as humans, are structured within family groupings. And these different families have to be rotated every year usually on a 4-year cycle, by something that is called crop rotation. Now, crop rotation schemes are a passionate topic, debated by gardeners everywhere, with everyone having their own particular scheme, and people tweaking other people's plans constantly. So this is not something that I can get into in any detail, because this would basically be the topic of another webinar. But generally it goes like this. Legumes, number 5, basically go to Brassicas, which is number 1, usually combined with some sort of greens, which could be a combination of number 8 or you know, possibly some of the greens that you find in Brassicas as well. And then you're going to go to alliums, which is number 4, and then to the nightshade family, which is number 2, and finally to cucurbits, number 3. So not all vegetables are insect pollinated. So I did a color coding on this particular slide, and the ones in yellow depend on the wind. So if you look at for family number 6, beet, Swiss chard, spinach, and so on, male flowers disperse the pollen into the air and female flowers are able to catch it. The ones in green, which is a lot of them, are basically self-pollinated. Asparagus, which is in pink, is an outlier, has both male and female parts, and being a perennial, it's not part of a regular crop rotation scheme. The 3 families that will be the focus of this webinar are the ones that are not colored. So that means we have Brassicas, number 1. We have cucurbits, number 3. These rely on insect pollination, plus the solanums, number 2, that fall in the self-pollination category. You might be asking yourself a question at this point, so hold on to that because it will be answered shortly. So Brassicas, with their bright yellow flower petals that you can see in the lower right on the screen, acting as a landing pad for bees, produce heavy and sticky pollen that is unable to be easily windborne, but it's perfectly transported by the hairy native bumblebees that you see on the left-hand side of your screen, particularly the common eastern bumblebee or the Bombus impatiens. As featured here, the common eastern is the native bee most commonly encountered in community gardens and is the most common native pollinator of agricultural crops. The fact that they're most active in early spring and are the last ones active in fall demonstrate that symbiotic coevolution. Brassicas do the best. Early spring, late fall. Anyone who has ever tried planting an arugula, which is a Brassica crop, in the hot, humid days of summer knows exactly what I'm talking about. The ability of Bombus impatiens to regulate their body temperature by shivering or basking in the sun enables them to forage during wetter, cooler conditions that honeybees and other native bees cannot tolerate, but is, no surprise, exactly the weather that Brassicas love. So the majority of native plants, you would be happy to know, are magnets for the common eastern bumblebee. According to my unscientific calculations, 67% of all native plants attract this particular bee. In the selection process of floral resources for pollinators, the most important, however, perhaps oversimplistic distinction is between long-tongued and short-tongued native bees. So Eupatorium maculatum, or Joe Pye weed on the left-hand side, has the flower form to attract long-tongued bees and butterflies, whereas flowering spurge, Euphorbia correlata, on the right, with its flat, open umbel, and an umbel is kind of a dome shape at the top, with tiny flowers clumped together, has the floral resources short-tongued bees, flies, and wasps are hungry for. Flower, or what are called syrphid flies, are second most important native pollinator. Look like wasps, but they're hairy like bees. They have only 2 wings instead of 4 for the wasps. They have flat abs rather than round. That's probably a result of all their working out. In North America, agriculture relies on the non-native drone fly, or the Aristalis tenax. But as we saw with the book in the beginning slide by Scarrington and Locke, done by Princeton Press, there are many native flower fly species to choose from. They are better adapted to low temperatures, overcast and enclosed conditions, making them better pollinators than bees for polytunnels. Another word for that is hoop houses and greenhouses. As honeybees have a bad sense of direction and are less active at low levels, low light levels, flower flies are definitely the more efficient pollinator. Flies visit, sorry, I just got mixed up. Flies visit 90% of horticultural crops. And there are many other flies in the particular, that are also involved in pollination. But the syrphid flies are a very prominent group within that larger family of flies. So for example, there are things like blowflies. Probably, if you're thinking of blowflies, that's exactly what they are. Blowflies and horseflies, for example, pollinate onions and get a yield that is comparable to or better that from honeybees. The same goes for carrots, especially when the temperature was less than optimal for honeybees. And there was also a study done of Florence Fennel, which is a vegetable, which is the fennel, not the herb fennel, but the fennel that has the bulb. That toward the end of the flowering season, the number of the other beneficial insects that actually visited the Florence Fennel, we're talking bumblebees and beetles and lady beetles and assassin bugs and wasps and so on, they decreased. And at the end of that season, that is when the number of flies actually increases. So one of the most destructive and ubiquitous pests any gardener faces are aphids. And flower flies are known as the aphid eating machines. Even though the adults feed on pollen and nectar and pollinate at the same time, the larvae, nearly invisible on the underside of a leaf, can consume up to 35 a day, along with honeydew, which is actually aphid poop. In fact, a study at the Université du Québec found that lady beetles could only eat a third of what a flower fly could, specifically the one called Apodes americanus that's getting all the attention in agricultural circles. So much so that there is a partnership between the Université du Québec and Vineland Research in southwestern Ontario to make them commercially available. So here's the first plant list. And this has to do with the top 10 flower fly magnets. If you look at, for example, the 10 that are listed here, you will see that these are flowers that attract the syrphid flies, which are both pollinators and predators, that they eat aphids and mites and thrips and whiteflies. And if you take a look at the different photos around from, let's say, from the top left, you're going to see Rudbeckia hirta, you're going to see Calico aster, and then of course our number 1 winner, Solidago canadensis, Canada goldenrod, and golden alexanders. And then in the middle on the left-hand side is the, let me see, I think it is the cow parsnip, and then we're back to the Rudbeckia hirta. Now, this is the table that I made up, and this is what, if you send me your email address and you're a NANPS member, I would be happy to send it to you. And this is just the first page of several, in where I actually took about 67 to 70 species and calculated the number of syrphid flies and the number of times that that specialist flower fly called EA, or Apodes americanus, comes up. So this is just to give you a glimpse of what you could possibly get through an email if you contact me. Now, here are the top 10 tachnid fly magnets, also pollinators and also predators. They eat beetle larvae, true bugs, caterpillars, Colorado potato beetles, and grasshoppers. And once again, Canada goldenrod comes up first. But then there are several others, such as the one on the left, which is rattlesnake master, which is not local to our area, but is a native plant. And so I'm using that kind of as a comparison compared to native plants to Eastern North America. And then, of course, the Philadelphia flea blane on the right-hand side. And I just want to say that both of these different flies do double duty as both pollinators and predatory insects, as I said. But it's interesting to note that some plants have a lot of syrphid flies, but they don't have any tachnid flies. So I just wanted to point out that kind of very interesting pattern. Now, for the Brassica family, the major pests are the diamondback moth, the cabbage white butterfly, the cabbage looper, and the cabbage worm. And this is where parasitoid wasps, the third of our 3 Ps, come in as a good alternative to BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bioinsecticide mainstay of organic gardeners and farmers. There are 3 groups of parasitoid wasps that you can see listed here. One are the chalcid, one is the ichneumon, which are very important for greenhouse management because they kill whiteflies, and then the spheicid. The trichogramma, part of the chalcid family, are the smallest known insects. 4 or 5 of them could fit on the head of a pin, but they can take on over 200 caterpillar species. Chalcid wasps lay their eggs in aphids to kill them. Now, T, like trichogramma, Brassica, which is the commercial variety for, usually for garden pests, is not native. But Trichogramma minutum, which is often used in orchards, actually is. So you can see from this that many other veggie families benefit from these beneficial wasps, right? You know, beets, carrots, corn, a lot of the alliums, right? You know, leeks, onions, so on. So they're very, very useful, beneficial insects. And once again, this is the
I don't think I can do this.
This is the list of the various parasitoid wasps, and another one of those tables that you would be able to acquire. Now, here are the top 2 winners for the chalcid and the ichneumon parasitoid wasp categories. Now, the chalcid wasps do not use pollen or nectar, but the other ones do. But they're both parasitoids, in which means that they eat insects and they parasitize them. They eat immature beetles and caterpillars. So the top winner in the first category is Rudbeckia lacinata, which is the green-headed coneflower. And the one for the second category is the cow parsnip. I just want to assure everyone that cow parsnip is in the same family, but it is not the same thing as the very dangerous giant hogweed, which everyone should be very, very wary of. So this, for example, is a picture actually of the cow parsnip. And as you can see, it's very similar to Queensland's lace. It's in that particular family. So here are the top 10 predatory wasp magnet plants. And they eat caterpillars and grasshoppers. Some of them drink nectar. And two of the most important you want in your garden are highlighted. One is called Sphex ichneumonius and one is called Sphex pennsylvanicus. The first one is the thread-waisted great black digger wasp, such an amazing name. And the second one is the great golden digger wasp. Now, I'm sure that you think that I'm stacking the deck here, or maybe you're kind of reading your page wrong, but you are correct. Solidago canadensis comes up first on top for the third time. And you're going to see some also, quite a few repeats of the same names that you saw before. And that is simply because they are the magnet plants. They are the ones that best attract these beneficial insects. Now, if I go back, let's see if I can do this, but 2 slides back, you might have noticed that, that one of the plants that came up in the Chalcid wasp category was this one, and that is called Augustache funiculum, also giant blue hyssop. And it attracts Chalcid wasps, which in turn eat your aphids. This beautiful nectar-rich plant was earlier in the 20th century planted en masse on the prairies as a honey plant. It's also very effective as a trap crop, which is another technique from companion planting. So you plant this hyssop a row away from your Brassica plants to lure the moths away from cabbages or cauliflower or Brussels sprouts or arugula or whatever you have from the Brassica family planted. And that is called trap cropping. And it's very useful, and you can do it with any of these different plants. Now, Brassicas have their own defense mechanism. And they do it through these bioactive mustard oils that are called GSLs. And this mustard oil bomb that Brassicas produce can kill viral and bacterial pathogens. And they protect the plant from various herbivores, from getting eaten by a deer or by a rabbit or whatever. These compounds also explain why doctors often recommend crucifers, that is Brassica plants, as good, healthy anti-cancer vegetables. 2 profs from Laurentian University in Sudbury wanted to find out if these same chemical compounds existed in native plants of this same family, and they found it. They found it in Cardamine diphylla, or 2-leaved toothwort, a native woodland plant, which actually attracts the same cabbage moth, Pyrrhus rape. In fact, indigenous peoples did enjoy Cardamine diphylla the same way we eat a lot of members of the Brassica family. They used it in green salads like arugula. They ate it as a radish, or they grated it into relish like horseradish. So you're probably wondering why solanums are coming up, because they are self-pollinated. Like, why do they need a bee if they're self-pollinated? And buzz pollination is the answer. Buzz pollination, or sonication, comes into play by various bumblebees, as well as by solitary leafcutter, sweat bees, and it's essential for all members of the nightshade family. So we're talking tomatoes, eggplants, sweet peppers, and potatoes, if you want a good yield. And if you take a look at the picture on the right, the bee basically grasps and bites the flower cone, leaving a bruise, which is known as a bee kiss. It rapidly shakes its body until the pollen grains shoot up the top and cover it all over with pollen. And if you go on NPR, called The Secret Buzz, National Public Radio, they have a fantastic video of the whole process of buzz pollination. So this sonication process produces larger, more abundant, and better shaped tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, and potatoes. So for example, even with bell peppers that actually do produce some nectar at the base of the flower as opposed to the others which do not produce nectar, you still will get stunted and misshapen fruit if there's no buzz pollination. As well, for interest's sake, blueberries and cranberries are also buzz pollinated. The frequency of the vibration is really important. So the high frequency vibration are the four ones that you see right here. So for example, you have narrow leaf mint, you have New England asters, you also have, excuse me, boneset, and also in the lower left corner is a native plant called prairie smoke, or Gayum triflorum. And this is something that Heather Home, an incredible researcher on native plant pollination, and actually one of our past speakers at NANPS, she discovered that prairie smoke is actually buzz pollinated. And why? Because its main pollinator, and basically its only pollinator, is Bombus impatiens. So the frequency of the vibration is very important in the selection of the native plant magnets that you want to use with crops that have to be buzz pollinated. Now, the major pest of any of this, the tomato, any tomatoes that you grow, a solanum pest is tomato hornworm. If you haven't seen one, it is this green thing on the bottom of the stem, and they're usually quite large and very interesting looking. This is where parasitoid wasps, including the paper wasp, which is called Politus Fuscatus, are absolutely essential. Now, don't confuse PF with another one, which is called Politus domulus, which is an invasive species that preys on butterfly caterpillars to feed its offspring. So make sure that you get the PF, what I call the PF one, is Politus Fuscatus. What they do is the wasp injects its eggs into the caterpillar's body under the skin, and at the same time, it injects this virus that happened to co-evolve with these wasps, and it disables the host defenses against intruders. And if you look at the picture, the little white blobs that you see on there, sorry, that's not a scientific term, but those little white blobs are actually cocoons. So these are the top 5 brachionoid parasitoid wasp magnets. Now these particular wasps, they do drink nectar, but look at all the things they eat. They eat insect eggs, aphids, beetles, caterpillars, tomato hornworm, flea beetles, leaf beetles, and white flies. Now, no surprise, what's at the top of the list but Canada goldenrod. And in this case, you're probably thinking, once again, that goldenrods basically have it wrapped up, and they do. They have the most beneficial solitary wasps on average. But I will show you a picture of another one, the one that just slid into second place very, very closely, and that is the green-headed coneflower, the Rubeckia laciniata. Now there are 10 predatory vespid wasp magnet species, and the predators, they eat exactly the same thing as the one that we just saw in the previous slide. And as I said before, the paper wasp that you want in your garden, and I know people are thinking, those are the wasps that kind of, that bit me in my childhood, but these are the beneficial paper wasps that you want. And this Politus Fuscatus is the main one. And in this case, Solidago canadensis comes in first, but there are many others there. And I want to move to number 10, even though it's at the bottom of this top 10 list. It is actually an all-star plant, and that is the one in the picture, Verbicina alternifolia, or what is called wing stem. It's considered one of the best nectar and pollen plants, attracting extremely large numbers of beneficials, especially, of course, those predatory wasps that use the hollow stems for their nests. Now, for another of the Solanum family members, this time potatoes, the big pest is the Colorado potato beetle. Here, beneficial beetles are the best to prey on its larvae, but like other beneficials, they're also effective on many other pests. Corn earworm, beet armyworm, Mexican bean beetle, slugs and snails, if you don't want to do the dish of beer out in your garden. But the main thing that they go after are Colorado potato beetles. And if you don't know what they look like, they are these wonderful critters on the right-hand side, and the spine soldier bug is on the left, about to get it. These beetles, including the spined soldier beetles, do not like bare soil. So leave mulch or surface residue, because the larvae kind of need to be under cover of all of the mulch or the dead matter on top. So these are the top predatory beetle magnets. And this is just a kind of a small selection. Ground beetles are really important. They actually like Rosa carolina, which you'll see at the top. And if you take a look at the Rosa carolina or pasture rose, it actually attracts many more beneficial insects than Rosa blanda, which is the smooth rose. And what all of these beetles like are bowl-shaped flowers with many stamens and pistils, which is exactly what they get with this particular type of native rose. When you look at soldier bugs, and kind of just watch the military language here, soldier bugs, the big one that you want is the goldenrod soldier beetle. And the top magnet of it is actually not goldenrod, surprisingly, but is Angelica atropurpurea, or purple-stemmed Angelica, which is the plant in the lower right. The one beetle that most people know is, of course, the lady beetle, right? And they really like, in addition to wild carrot, which has, for example, 6 of them on it, is Asclepias tuberosa, or butterfly milkweed. Another type of beetle are, of course, called the Robe Beetles. But unlike the other beetles, these are the only ones that do not collect pollen and nectar. They need decaying organic matter for their food. The solandums also have their own defense mechanism, just like the Brassicas did with their mustard oil bomb. The solandums have alkaloids. They're found in a number of native plants that are often used medicinally, and you can see a list of them at the bottom. But these medicinal plants, and they're all native to North America, have been actually banned by many countries in the European Union because they contain PA. So I would not suggest that you go out and have a midnight snack on one of these particular plants, even if you have them in your garden. Now we move to the third group and the final group, and that's cucurbits. Now, cucurbits are the one that basically access specialist bees such as Peponapis prunosa and Xenoglossa strenua. And here, I think we are all indebted to the research work of Sue Chan, who actually lives up my way near Peterborough. And this has been her specialty. And so we thank her very, very much for all the work that she has done on the squash bee. What these bees do is that they live very close by, often in like the females in deep vertical tunnels underground or right on the ground underneath the plants, while the males, of course, spend overnight right inside of the flowers. Their scopa with widely spaced hairs are absolutely perfectly sized for transporting the very sticky and very large pollen grains that you get from all of these vines. Now the flowers, because they close around midday, and by about noon, they lose about 75% of their reproductive ability, the specialist bees are absolutely essential because they're really early risers. They're out before dawn collecting pollen, whereas honeybees basically don't usually start till around 9 a.m. They're really, really late risers, and they have a lot less time to be able to get out and get the food. So if you take a look at all of these different members of the cucurbit family, and you probably can recognize all of them, you can see the influence of the specialist bees, right? Absolutely, absolutely essential. But look at all the other bee species that are actually there as well, which means that when you have the specialists and the native bees visiting the same floral resources, it's going to bode very well for the fruiting of all of these cucurbits. Research from the University of Georgia found with watermelon specifically that if you want to get nicely shaped and large fruit, the number of bee visits is actually more important than the amount of time that the bee stays on the actual flower. So now we're going to move to the top 5 practical tips. And the goal overall of working in beneficial insects to your vegetable garden or to your fields is that you want multiple complementary pollinators, predators, and parasitoids. The first point is to employ a no-till system. Sustainable agriculture has been going more and more in that direction in recent years. But the main reason why you should be using a no-till system rather than getting your rototiller out and digging everything up at the end of the season, and of course we all want to have our garden nice and clean at the end, I certainly do. But the reality is that 70% of all 20,000 bee species nest under the ground, with the majority of them being specialist bee species. So they're ground nesting solitary bees, and they construct their nests really close to the flowers that they want to get their preferred pollen or nectar from. The reality as well is that you get more abundant members of this true bug family, which I showed you before or mentioned before, that basically feed as well on mites and thrips and aphids and leafhoppers and insect eggs. And they basically include all of these different groups: predatory plant bugs, stink bugs, damsel bugs, assassin bugs, ambush bugs, minute pirate bugs, and big-eyed bugs. Just fantastic names. So these are the top plant bug magnets. So you see here for assassin bugs, ambush bugs, predatory stink bugs, damsel bugs, and then of course all of the other ones, including predatory mites at the bottom, which eat insect eggs and immature thrips and so on. And of course, according to their name, they eat mites and are very important for being an eater of spider mites and getting rid of those in your garden and your greenhouse along with whiteflies. And don't worry, all of this would be sent to you as well. This is all part of the different tables. So the second practical tip is that you need to plant so that there are blooms year-round with different flower forms and different colors. So bees are particularly attracted to these colors: blue, purple, violet, white, and yellow. You need to have both deep tubular flowers for the long-tongued bees, for the butterflies and the moths. And you can see several choices there, such as Monardia fistulosa, Penstemon digitalis, our perennial lupin. But you also need shallow, small, open daisy-like flowers and flat-topped umbels for the short-tongued bees, for the flies, for the wasps, and the beetles. So you need to have both. So this is the equation that I've made up that basically sums everything up. That this is kind of the essential plant family equation for attracting beneficial insects. So basically, there are 4 major families that you should definitely have. That is the daisy or the astera family, the umbellifers, also kind of known as the carrot family, the mint family, and the milkweed family. If you're kind of low on money and low on space, the 2 main ones that you absolutely have to have are the ones that are highlighted in green, right? basically, if you look at the vast majority of species, if you think back to that first table, out of those 10 flower magnets for the syrphid flies, 7 of those were from the daisy family and 3 were for the umbellar family. So basically, those are the 2 major families that you need to have. At the bottom, you'll see that there's the rose, the erica, and the willow families. Rose basically encompasses all the fruit trees, apple, pear, plum, service berries. The erica family is basically berries. You're talking about blueberries, raspberries, cranberries, and so on. And then, of course, the salix family or the willows. These are absolutely essential because these are the plants that are going to bloom very early in the spring. So as soon as these beneficial insects come out and they want food, where they're going to find the food is in those 3 bottom categories, the rose, the berries, and the willows. So you need to plant those somewhere close by. So research has indicated as well that if you remove, for example, that carrot family, the umbellar family, that leads to a decline in the specialization of pollinator networks. It is absolutely essential to be there. And all of this is really important for specialist bees because unlike the other ones, they have even a smaller window in which to find their host plants and their food and shelter. Third tip, add native green manures and nitrogen fixers for soil health, for weed control, for water retention. Now, normally what people do is they plant annual hairy vetch, alfalfa, clover, but there are native possibilities, including Dahlia candida, Lesbodeza hirta, Desmondium canadensis, and then Vicia americana, which is our native perennial substitute for the Vicia villosa, which is the hairy vetch. And then the one at the bottom that you can see the picture of, and that is the partridge pea. And the partridge pea is actually got a very, very special trick about it because it's got extra floral nectaries found at the base of the leaf petioles. And so they attract all of these following native bees. So they're very important and you don't need the clover and alfalfa to be able to put in good green manures, cover cropping for your nitrogen fixers. Fourth tip, you have to allow 5 to 10% of your garden space to beneficials. You've got to clump them in groups of at least 1 meter in diameter. Research has shown that they're best able to access the floral resources this way. And you can do these areas in the form of a permanent field buffer, wildflower strips, a hedgerow. That's where you can put all your spring flowering shrubs that we talked about. But generally, they find that less disturbed field margins lead to more abundant beneficials. So that means that if you put in perennial, permanent native plants and, leave them over a period of years, you're actually going to accumulate many more beneficial insects over the years. You also need plants with hollow, pithy stems for the cavity nesting bees. And that's where Sambucus pubescens, any of the service berries, any of the canes that you've got from your raspberry, your blackberry, your gooseberry are perfect for this. And please, even though maybe you're like me and you like to have a really clean garden at the end of the season, or at least the way I used to think, you need to allow crops to bolt, to provide extra forage sites. So to bolt means to go to seed. So especially like lettuce, arugula, Japanese daikon radishes is the best choice for flower flies when it actually goes to seed. Fennel, broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, endive, potatoes, cilantro, basil, any of these are fantastic forage sites. And predatory mites that, of course, as we talked about, that eat spider mites, they need trees to overwinter in. So another reason to have that hedgerow kind of in between or at the edge of your garden. And so now we're at number 5 in the picture that we started this presentation with. And I'm sure that you know of what a bee hotel is, but have you heard about a beetle bank? Because this is a beetle bank right here. This is, of course, a little blue stem in the fall that has been planted between rows of brassicas, cabbage. And this is a beetle bank and is absolutely essential as well that you put one of those in somewhere. So you use dense bunched native grasses, and I provided a list there, but basically it's any of the native grasses. It doesn't matter which one. And this provides shelter for overwintering, egg laying, and pupating of predatory ground beetles. And as I noted before, the robe beetles are the only ones that don't eat the pollen or the nectar, but they need the dead organic matter that you're going to get from a bank like this. And the older the native plant border is, once again, the greater the diversity of beetles. So these are the references, and you're able to access that as well if you send me an email. And I just want to acknowledge that the Illinois Wildflower site is fantastic and was also a source for my database compilation. So I definitely want to give them credit for all the great work that they did with that site. And finally, just before I leave you, I don't want to let you think that I forgot the lacewings and the praying mantises, because they are also two non kind of insect they are beneficial insects, but they are not, of course, like the other ones that we talked about. They fit into a different category, which I just simply didn't have time to put into this presentation, but they're also essential. And so I just want to thank you very much for adding native plants to your vegetable garden. And my email is at the bottom, and feel free to contact me. And thank you very much for listening.
It's my turn now. Okay, so now is the question and answer period. So I'm going to start off with the first question, which comes from Sophie. Which bees are the ones that pollinate the most?
I would say, whoopsie, sorry. I would say that basically probably the bombus, like all of the various kind of bumblebees, are probably, at least in terms of agricultural crops and garden crops, we know that the bombus impatiens is the one that that is the one that is found most often in community gardens and also in agricultural fields. But basically any of the bombus species are ones that come up the most often in various databases.
Okay, our second question is from Mohammed Hussein. Anophyly, is the pollination in Asteraceae? That's the question.
Sorry, Adam, can you just repeat that? I was just trying to figure out how to do this in presenter view. But can you just ask that question again, please?
Anophyly, is the pollination in Asteraceae? So the aster family, is it pollination in the aster family? That term, Anophyly. Anemophyly.
Okay, I don't think
I
it has
haven't heard that before either.
I haven't either. I don't think it has a Y at the end, if I'm not mistaken. I think it has an AE at the end. But I have to be honest, I don't fully understand the question. So I'm just going to ask Adam if you could put that in the chat to that individual, and then just ask if maybe they could reword that question. I'd be more than happy to give it a second shot. But I have to be honest, I don't fully understand the question itself.
Okay. So then I should go to the next one. LK has asked, I've heard tachinid flies also attack monarch butterfly larvae. Is that true?
Tachinid flies are not like this other group, which I did not tackle in this presentation, and I made a note of that at one of the first slides. And that is the group, of course, that that spiders and lacewings and praying mantises and so on fall into. And they are very different from the other ones, which are, you know, syrphid flies and tachnid flies and all the parasitoids and so on, because they feed indiscriminately and opportunistically. So that means that they often will eat the same pests that the other ones, you know, all the ones that I talked about here that are beneficial insects, that they basically eat as well. But spiders and others are a bit less choosy. So they will simply eat whatever kind of comes their way. So they will eat, you know, good bugs as well as, for example, the bad guy pests. So I think that tachnid flies are fine. But I think that probably what you're describing in that question is perhaps more a question of what the insects in that other category would possibly go after.
Okay, so now we can go back to that other question. Aminophily means wind pollination. So wind pollination is the pollination in Asteraceae, and then it's a question mark. Is wind pollination the pollination in Asteraceae? So do asters, the aster family, do they get wind pollinated?
Wind pollinated. So thank you for the repronunciation of that word. Yeah. So in terms, because I do know that word for wind pollination. So basically, most of these are pollinated by insects, and a lot of the asters. So, for example, if you look at you know, goldenrod as well, the pollen has a tendency to be quite sticky and large as well, relatively speaking. And so that makes it more difficult. It's not to say that wind pollination will not occur, but I think that it's more difficult for that plant, let's say any of the plants in the aster family, to be fully pollinated through wind pollination alone. I think insects and, you know, bees, for example, are one of those that are absolutely essential for full pollination of the aster family.
Our next question comes from Susanna. I have lots of volunteer goldenrods in my garden. Are there any non-native goldenrods?
No. So I don't know the exact figure, but I think we have approximately like 75 different goldenrod species in Ontario alone, and they are all native. And just to reassure people, I know that many people have talked about this, but goldenrod does not cause, you know, hay fever. It is ragweed that does that, and I know that as a huge hay fever sufferer. So there are a lot of species of goldenrod in this province, and as I say, as far as I know, they are all native. Who knows what might be invading our country, but at this point, they are all native and all great.
So Gaia 3 asks, regarding prairie smoke, if it does not go to seed, is it correct to assume that there were not any pollinators around?
If prairie smoke does not go to seed, well, basically prairie smoke has, of course, you know, the bombus, you know, patients that particular bumblebee that pollinates it. As I say, it's also buzz pollinated. So there would be other bees that possibly could do that. So I think that, yeah, the prairie smoke, I mean, that it definitely would be pollinated.
Anja asks, the 7-spot ladybug beetle is the only native, question mark. Are there other native lady beetles?
That is basically the main one. And that is where, you know, when you get into, you know, the beetle category and also the, you know, the arthropods and so on, that you have to really, really watch and be very, very discerning about which beneficial insect you want to attract. So going from the lady beetles to, once again, to the praying mantis here on the left, you know, there's the Chinese praying mantis, which is usually much larger. This is the native one. but that's basically the only one. Most of the other ones that you see are ones that are, you know, invasive and are basically imports, you know, to our country. And so this is where you have to be very discerning so that you actually attract the correct beneficial insect. And I'm always a big advocate of learning on your own, that, you know, look it up and make sure before you actually work out your, you know, your beneficial insect equation. But yes, you are correct that the seven spotted is native.
And Sarah's asking, it would be so great to get a plant tour of your garden, maybe some pictures of veggies growing with natives. Is that possible? I'm not sure if that's a question or a compliment, but.
Well, I'll take it as a compliment, but just to say, Sarah, it hasn't happened yet. It's happening next year on the farm. And there will be a website and probably a podcast to accompany this. And this is a different tangent, but it's going to be done in conjunction with the Feminist Sustainable Building Project that I am doing on the farm that I initiated and am project manager of, which is called Active Women Building a Passive House Plus, which is an all women construction project to promote women in the trades and the STEM subjects, mechanical, structural engineering, for example. And as part of that project, we're having women come from across North America, that there is going to be the building of this walled garden, which is going to be a straw baled walled garden, and probably about 75 by 150 feet. And on the inside wall are going to be espaliered fruit trees. So peaches, nectarines, apricots, cherries, you know, plums, all done with various train systems like cordons or palmettes and so on. And this is going to hopefully, I'm hopefully getting a grant to be able to see whether a microclimate that is produced by a walled garden can actually allow us in central Ontario to produce you know, peaches and nectarines and stone fruits like that are very, very sensitive to, of course, climate and weather conditions and frost. So just to say, all that information is going to be coming out through the house project, and we're going to be inviting people to come and take a part of the walled garden and help with the plastering and help to be able to learn how to do, you know, espaliering. And then the vegetable garden is going to be put inside of the walled garden with all of the perennials, that is like asparagus and rhubarb and fennel and all of that on the outside walls of the walled garden. So yes, if you keep in touch, we'll definitely put you on the listserv and you'll be able to find out about all of the cool projects that are going to be taking place next summer and next fall, 2022.
Robert's asking, how does this apply to a small backyard garden? I have many of the plants listed, but I do not have the space to make a square meter of one species. Okay.
So basically, I think that's fine if you can't do like the 1 square meter. That's just kind of like an optimal kind of ideal. But I think what basically the research is indicating is that if you bunch the particular flowers together, so, you know, and I think generally that's the rule, that if you put 2 or 3 together, they don't all have to be the same species, but just have a, you know, kind of a clump of them together. It's just so much easier for the beneficial insects and the pollinators to find them and to be able to kind of forage for floral resources without having to, you know, do a lot of moving around. So I would say just do what you can with what you've got. I think it's always better just to, you know, put in a few. That's a heck of a lot better than having none. And so that compliments to you for having all of these plants. I think that you're very clearly on the road there. So congratulations.
Troy is asking, is there an insect that will help with aphids but not harm monarch caterpillars, and what plant to attract the insect?
So definitely, I would say flower flies are the aphid, you know, they're the basically, as I said, like the aphid eating machine. So definitely flower flies, they will do nothing to monarch butterflies, and they won't do anything to anything else. And basically, if you send me your email, I will send you that page that I put up with the flower fly plant magnets. But I can tell you right now, number one on the list is, of course, we can all shout it out right now, is Solidago canadensis, or Canada goldenrod is number one.
Desnej asks, how do you keep slugs and ants out of the garden?
How you keep what?
Slugs and ants out of your garden.
Okay, so basically, slugs are one of the pests that actually can be remedied through these beneficial insects. You don't need to do putting the beer into the container and placing it out in the middle of your garden. So like the parasitoid wasps will also go after the ants. And so basically I would say that the problems that you're indicating, they can all be handled by the insects talked about in this webinar.
Okay. W. McLean asks, in the last 1 or 2 years, we've had a problem with a brown marmorated stink bug, which affects our tomato fruits. It is not the beneficial stink bug you have listed. Do you know if there are any beneficials that control it?
That's a really good question. That would be something that I would have to look up, and that makes me very curious to find that out as well. Yeah, I honestly cannot answer that question off the top of my head, but I actually kind of know what you're talking about because I've seen that in my garden in the past as well. And for me, it was also tomato plants. And I think that there are a number of stink bugs as well that are, of course, not native. And it's very possible that the one that you're talking about fits into that category. But I have to admit, I don't know the answer to that, but I think that that would be a very good question. And I certainly will, do some research on it. And we can let you know through social media of NANPS if you want to post your question there. And when we get an answer, we'll post the answer.
Send it to naps@naps.org, and then I can forward it. W. McLean, if you're still on. Megan is asking, do you know of any native plant that deters cucumber beetles or acts as a trap?
For cucumber beetles, yeah. I just wanted to say that's a question that is very close to my heart, simply because when, and this is just a personal anecdote and then I'll get to answer the question, that when I was growing several acres of cucumbers for Bix, one year we had a huge infestation of cucumber beetles. And when my mom drove over to the weighing station, Bix basically just loaded up the pickup truck with bags of this particular insecticide that said on it, derivative of Agent Orange, which is, of course, a very, very dangerous carcinogen. And that is the moment that I became an organic farmer at the age of 15, 16, that I told my mom that we were not going to be putting this particular insecticide on the cucumbers. And instead, what I did is I squished every single cucumber beetle myself and went back to school with fingertips that looked like I had a real nicotine addiction. They were absolutely bright yellow orange. So I'm not recommending that to you, but that is, of course, one possibility. But cucumber beetles, definitely, just like with the I'm just going to see if I can go back here. Just wait a second, just so I can show you. Just like, for example, with the Colorado potato beetle, because they're very, very similar, and they actually look similar, that basically beetles really, like the beneficial beetles, really help other beetles. So in this case, I would basically say anything from this category, with the beneficial beetles, ground and tiger beetles, the spined soldier bugs, that they basically would do the cucumber beetles. They would also do slugs and snails. And so this, for example, this page here, once again, this would be the page with all of the flowers that you would be best to plant in your cucumber patch.
Amanda's asking, do you have any suggestions for a good quality native plant field type field guide?
A good native plant field guide. Oh,
there are many.
There's so many. I don't know whether the question is relating specifically to native plants and their connection with beneficial insects. If that is the case, I will just show you this one. I have it, and I would highly, highly recommend it. The same as I would recommend anything by the Xerces Society. Is this one here, the farming with native beneficial insects. That's a fantastic one. I realize here that I've got this too, but there's also the attracting native pollinators. That's another really good one. But in terms of an actual field guide, well, I'm actually kind of in the process of trying to compile something that would put all of this information together around beneficial insects, birds, all of the different pollinators, because I find that there seems to be a gap in the literature between what is great for people with professional degrees in botany and biology, and the rest of the literature that basically just says attracts birds and butterflies. And for me, I want more information than that. As a layperson, I think I'm beyond just the birds and the butterflies. I want to know what butterfly and what types of birds and what season. I want more information, but I don't maybe need all of the super technical information that I would get from a field guide that maybe people at the Ministry of Natural Resources would use, for example. And so that's something that I'm kind of developing for myself and hopefully putting it out to the world in the next year. But at this point, that's not going to help you. So I would just say that I think any of the, the native plant books by Lorraine Johnson, who I know would be highly recommended, any field guide by, by Peterson or many of those other companies, I think they would also be good for your purposes. It depends on how much you know and basically how much information you want and what stage you're at in your knowledge skill base.
Okay, Sophie's asking, what are the pros and cons of the espalier techniques, please?
Oh, okay, to be honest, that is the subject of, I just finished doing all the research on that. That is the subject for a totally different webinar because that has to deal with fruit trees, right? But also, you can do it with bushes. For example, I am going to put all of my red cordons or my red currants in cordons, which basically run horizontal. They run on a diagonal up a walled surface. And it's a way to be able to get a much greater fruit yield from a much smaller space. And of course, this was, a espalier technique that was developed in France, back in, the 1600s. And it's something that I think really needs resurrecting. And we need to actually have some data research done on the effectiveness of that, and especially for the tender, as I said, the tender stone crop fruits. Because we're not going to be able to rely on California with their droughts in the future. We're going to have to plant more of these here and all over the province, not just in southwestern Ontario.
Mohammed's asking, what are the local plants that act as a trap or attract the beetles?
Okay, well, I'm just going to kind of go back to that slide that I showed again. But you've got, first of all, your beetle bank is really, really important, right? That you have those dense bush grasses, that they are protected, they can find shelter and overwintering space in. But these are basically the ones. So anything from the sunflowers, the carrot, the milkweed family, the aster family, the rose family, and of course, you know, any of the ones that are here as well, like Asclepias tuberosa, the yarrow, and the partridge pea. Any of those are great beetle magnet plants.
Okay, the next question is, can you please repeat the name of the Feminist Build Project? MA is asking.
Okay, there will be a website going up probably this summer. It had to be delayed because of COVID, so we're just kind of getting things back on track, but it's called Active Women Building a Passive House Plus. And as I say, it's going to build to the Passive House Plus standard that is common in the EU, and it is the only way that we are going to meet our carbon neutral, I say zero carbon targets. It goes way beyond what the federal government is presently proposing. And we're going to try to prove that it can be done at a very affordable price point.
Janet Harrison is asking, any remedy for dispensing of Japanese beetles, a generalist beetle that munches on over 100 species of plants, besides picking them off and putting them in the freezer?
Yes, okay, very good question. And I actually have the answer to that, and I was going to put it in, and now let me just see if I can find it on my sheets. There is one, and it's just escaping me right now, but it actually is specifically for Japanese beetles and for grubs. So anybody, for example, that has lawn. So just for a second, I'm just looking through my sheets to see whether it will spark my memory. And Janet, since I can't find it here and it's just right there at the tip of my tongue and I'm forgetting it, I will we'll send you an email and I'll give you the answer to that because I do have it written down.
Okay.
Pardon my memory.
Okay, from Lily, we grow a lot of garlic in our community garden and we often have the attacks of the allium moth. Is there anything that goes after that?
Yes. So if you, let me just go back here and then I can show you and then you'll see exactly what plants. Yes, it's actually called a leek moth. And if you take a look at these ones that, like any of these kind of parasitoid wasps, they will, for example, go after, you know, the allium or the leek moth as well. And let me just find another one for you here. Second. The beetles may do that for you, but I would probably go with the parasitoid, the various wasps as your first choice.
Okay, and this might be the final question from Sophie. Are peaches and nectarines native to North America?
Peaches and nectarines are not. Basically, most of the fruit trees that you are going to find are not going to be native. There are exceptions, of course, like Prunus americanus, which is the American plum, the Malus coronaria, which is our wild crab apple, which is basically a Carolinian species that is also native. And then, of course, we have several of kind of more of our smaller shrubs rather than trees. So you're looking at the various blueberries, right? The high bush and the low bush, they're all native, as well as the Sambucus canadensis, which is the elderberry. So there are many of the smaller shrubs that are actually native to North America. But when we're getting into the large fruit tree category, peaches, nectarines, apricots, they are not. They are imports. I love them, but they're imports.
Oh, and there's one more question that just came in. Beetles do not like bare soil, and this is from Susan McMillan, but we are advised to keep some of our soil bare for nesting bees. Can you comment?
Yeah, so basically that's where a beetle bank comes in. So you need to kind of find a position or a space in your garden for that. It doesn't have to be like right between the rows as the picture that I showed you, right between those two Brassica rows. That's a situation for a, for a field, right? So when you're dealing with cropping of, of large scale Brassicas, but somewhere there should be maybe one edge of your garden, be a beetle bank so that it's easy for them to hop back and forth from the dense bunch grasses. So I think you need to kind of work in different sections of your garden, one where you're going to leave the bare soil for, for the ground nesting solitary bees. And I have many of them on the farm as well. And you can see the holes all over the place. So you definitely need to leave space for that. So I would just say you need to kind of work out like an architectural plan of your garden so you can have these different areas so that all of the beneficial insects are going to have access to exactly what they need for floral resources and for the shelter that they need.
I think that's it for questions. I think we've done them all.
Excellent. Thank you.
So I think it's...
So Janice, just wanted to thank you. Wonderful talk today. So much information, and I think this is going to be a great resource once we post this on our social media. Once again, on behalf of NANPS, thanks everyone for attending, and take care.
Thank you very much. Bye, folks.
See you later.
Thank you so much. Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm really sorry. Thank you so much. I just wondered when you were mentioning about fruits, I saw you didn't, or heard you didn't mention pawpaw. And I just wondered what your thoughts are on pawpaws and the future.
No, I mean, I have actually never tried a pawpaw, but I certainly, have seen them, and we sell them at our sale. And no, I mean, and pawpaw is absolutely, I mean, like the takeoff in popularity of pawpaws is incredible. The only reason I didn't mention it is because it would not grow in my climate. But in the walled garden, it's a real possibility. And so that has given me pause for thought that maybe I should definitely work in a pawpaw. Yeah. But it just honestly was just not something, because it is basically a Carolinian species and needs very, very hot, kind of climatic conditions for its proper growth. I honestly didn't think of that for the walled garden, and so you have just made me think of something that I didn't, and so I thank you very much. I think a pawpaw definitely should be part of the walled garden.
Great. Yeah, I was very lucky. I tried one, the fruit of one, and it was delicious, and they do seem to grow around the Hamilton area, so I was just, I'm still learning, so it's interesting to hear that. Did you say you're in Peterborough? Yeah, so my the farm, I live in Peterborough now, but the farm is east of Peterborough in Northumberland County. So it's just kind of the northern part of Northumberland County. So it is in zone 5. And so pawpaws don't quite make it into that zone. But definitely in a walled garden, what you have to understand is the microclimate that you create through a walled garden. And this goes back to Paris in the 1600s, when they constructed what were called les pêche murs, which were peach walls. And they found that the temperature within the walled garden rose approximately 10 to 12.5 degrees Celsius higher than the ambient temperature. So that would definitely be very compatible with a pawpaw. Thank you so much.
You're more than welcome.